So we're welcoming this evening the People's Organization for Progress founder and director, Larry Hamm. And I want to thank you, sir, for your time this evening. And I welcome you to this forum because the jury is now in deliberation in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin. And I think it's appropriate for you to share your thoughts because in New Jersey, you have been on the front line of the fight against police brutality your whole life. But it really seemed to come to a head for a lot of people, Mr. Hamm, last year in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the end of the trial and how you absorbed this moment.
Well, good evening, Max, and it's good to see you. Good to talk with you. Just before I got on the Zoom call, I was reflecting on this, and the comparison came to mind of the OJ trial, the anticipation that people were waiting for a verdict in the OJ trial. And I can remember the moment. I was at work. I'm not going to say where I worked and all that stuff, but trust me, I was at work in a somewhat corporate setting. And I can tell you that employees at that time were listening on their radios. Like back then, I'm not sure if everybody even had desktop computers. Mm-hmm. You know, and most employees would have a little radio, clock radio, something on their desk. And many of the employees, black and white, were listening over the radio to the trial on a fairly daily basis, you know, not all day long, but, you know, lunchtime, that kind of thing. And I can remember when the verdict came out in the OJ trial, you could literally hear a roar throughout the building. Mm-hmm. And the roar wasn't a unanimous roar. It was the roar of many voices, some jubilant and some disgusted in the outcome of the OJ trial. This trial is different in the sense that it's been much shorter than OJ, and that is not, I don't think, what most people thought. I think most people thought before the trial started that it would last at least a month, that it'd be May before we got a decision. And the trial has been, 2 weeks? About 2 weeks.
Right.
And the prosecution, I think, did a good job of presenting the case. And I think many people feel that Derek Chauvin will be found guilty on at least one of the counts. I think most people who have been following police brutality cases feel that he may be probably convicted at least on the manslaughter, the least of the charges. I think he's got second degree, third degree, and manslaughter. Mm-hmm. I think, isn't it second degree manslaughter, something like that? Yes, it is. Yes, so I think most people
second degree murder.
Right, second degree murder, but manslaughter also. And I think most people think that in the circles that I travel in, that if he's found guilty, it will be on the manslaughter charge. Now, I don't count myself among them. My personal opinion is that it's still a coin toss, because I think that this whole time, the defense hasn't been trying to convince the whole jury. They've been trying to convince one or two people on the jury that they think might see it their way or see it their way, somewhat see it their way, enough to not vote for a guilty verdict, or maybe even any verdict.
And your point was at least one of the jurors in the interview initially expressed an objection to Black Lives Matter made the point that all lives matter,
That's right.
which perhaps creates an opening. Does this, or is this part of the reason why you have that point of view?
Yes, that's exactly why. Because I was listening to the voir dire when they were picking the jury. I was actually listening, and I said to myself, when that lady said all lives matter, I said that's the one that they're going to go after. They're going to go after her, you know. And if they can create enough doubt in her mind, you know, it doesn't have to be 6-6. It doesn't have to be 10-2, 11-1, and it's a done deal. You know, it's a hung jury. And I think that's what they're shooting for. I don't really think at this point they're shooting in this stage, they're shooting for a guilty verdict. I think they're shooting for a hung jury. If they get that, then if there's a retrial, then they'll probably try really hard to get a not guilty verdict. I think that the defense appeared to be outclassed by the prosecution, in my humble opinion.
Well, were you surprised by the tack of the defense? So you've been involved and observed cases like this your whole life.
Yes.
And did you ever hear a closing argument made in a murder trial like this one, where there's so much evidence against the accused, where there's damning evidence, where the defense makes the case that this was a reasonable officer reasonably performing his duties? It almost seems the opposite of those cases where we see not guilty by reason of mental insufficiency, wherein the defense attorney makes a case that this is a person who had lost his mind and therefore was not responsible. The defense was saying he was in complete control of his faculties while you, the rest of the world, watched him murder this man.
Right.
What did you make of that?
Well, Max, the majority of cases I've witnessed, from my point of view, were situations where the officers should have been found guilty, but were not found guilty. I mean, we could go all the way back to Rodney King. You know, we could go back to Philip Pennell. We just passed the 31st anniversary of the killing of Philip Pennell by Officer Gary Spath. The regional medical examiner in that case said that the teenager Pennell was on his knees with his hands raised when he was shot in the back by Officer Gary Spath. Spath was found not guilty. I remember the Michael Anglin case, where Michael Anglin, another kid, a teenager, shot in the back of the head by a police officer, found not guilty. Amadou Diallo, none of those officers were found guilty in the murder of Amadou Diallo. And I can go on and on. You know, the overwhelming majority of police brutality cases that go to trial, the officers are not found guilty. So the one component, you know, and I've been watching a lot of cable, you know, news, because they've been giving full coverage to the trial. But the one component the pundits have not discussed, they discuss a lot of things, you know, like what you presented tonight, and, you know, the way the defense, you know, some of the pundits felt that the defense was lacking and so on and so forth. A lot of analysis, but the one thing that they don't talk about, the one element, is racism. I'm not talking about the racism in George Chauvin. I'm not talking about the racism, you know, of some of the people that the defense put on the stand. I'm talking about the invisible racism that may be inculcated into some of the jurors themselves. Because as flimsy and as scattershot as the defense argument has been for Floyd, it wouldn't be the first time that that type of defense hasn't, it wouldn't be the first time that that type of defense has been presented, and that the jurors or a juror accepted those arguments, you know.
Well, that's a fascinating point. It's a fascinating point because what it suggests is that repetition of reasonable men reasonably undertaking their duties is attempting to connect with that individual sitting there who might not even be aware of his or her racism, right? Who nonetheless is convinced that this is the way things are.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. You know, because another set of people would look at that same situation and say, this man is guilty.
right.
But I mean, look at what's going on in America today. A whole movement. What was it? 65 million people voted for Donald Trump, who, according to the Washington Post, told over 30,000 verifiable lies, who to this day says that the election was fraudulent and that he won the election. There were 65 million people that agreed with Trump, or at least agreed enough with him to vote for him. I mean, we had the biggest voter turnout in the history of the country, and almost half of those voters sided with Trump. There were enough people that accepted the big lie that the election was fraudulent and that Trump had won. There were enough of those people for 1,000 of them to storm the Capitol. And if you heard the things that they were saying, and when an analysis was done of who these people were and what walks of life, many of them were educated people, professional people.
So see, when you put it that way, and you only need one juror, it makes it seem impossible that this man will be found guilty.
Right.
Or next to impossible.
Right.
Yeah.
One. Now here's a different scenario. The Earl Faison case, which is the case that really transformed the People's Organization for Progress. It literally changed. I mean, we had been involved in police brutality protests before Faison, but that case changed the very nature of our organization. It really made us into a street organization. I mean, prior to that, we had been more of like an educational and informational type organization, a lot of programs, a lot of forums, and periodic protests now and then. It flipped it, and we're the opposite now. Most of the time we're in the street, and every now and then we'll have a program or educational type event. But in the Faison case, I can remember like yesterday, it was on a Halloween day in 2000, I think it was, that the jury was picked, and an all-white jury was picked. And we said then, the fix is in. Those officers are gonna walk. But what happened when the jury finally gave its verdict? To the shock of everybody. We were shocked, but the Faison defense, the police defense team, 5 officers, first time 5 had ever been indicted on police brutality, 5 together. And they each had separate lawyers, but they were all working as a team. They were so shocked that they asked the jury to be polled. They were shocked because the all-white jury, which now had 1 black person on it because 1 person got sick and had to be replaced with an alternate, but that jury came back unanimous on all charges against the officers. So it worked out exactly the opposite in the Faison case. But in the Faison case, 60 witnesses, 120 pieces of evidence. You know, the U.S. attorneys who tried the case did, in my humble estimation, an excellent job. It's just unfortunate that the county prosecutor refused to bring the murder charge, which is a state statute, and indict those officers. They were never indicted by the county prosecutor. So they all out now. You know, the longest, four of them got 3 years, one got close to 10 years. They're all out now. But you can't really, you know, I know everybody is saying it looks like Chauvin is going to be convicted, but, you know, I'm still saying it's a coin toss. I hope that he's convicted, of course. But I still say it's a coin toss, because all they need is one person to hold out, you know, but we'll see. But let me say this, Max. Even if the jury convicts Chauvin on all of the charges, the second and third degree murder charges, the manslaughter, even if they convict him on all of them, it's still not justice. Now, we'll feel good because it's a modicum of justice, but it's not really justice. Because if you, Max Pizarro, or me, Larry Hamm, had a fight one night with somebody, you know, and we wrestled that person down and we put our knee on that person's neck, and that person strangled to death under the weight of our bodies, we would be convicted. We would be indicted on first degree murder charges. And it wouldn't have taken a whole year to start the trial. We'd be serving our prison sentence already. We might be halfway through the first year of our prison sentence by now. So even in being found guilty, Chauvin gets a preferential type treatment because he's a cop, and because he's white, and because some of those jurors, and it may not even just be the white jurors. You know, all of us are taught from the time that we are children to have deference to authority, and especially to have deference to the police officers. I can remember when I was a kid, before I even went to kindergarten, you could buy these coloring books, right, in the supermarket. And my mother would buy me these coloring books. And I loved to color. And I would take the books home, and, you know, it'd be the pictures with just the outline, and you would have to color in the character. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
In the coloring book. Who was always in those coloring books? The police officer. The police officer is your friend, you know, and we're taught that from children. We watch cartoons on television, cartoon shows where the police officers are our friends. And if they are critical, if there's some kind of critical slant to it, they're usually pictured as some type of comical character, but certainly not a character to be feared, you know, or the villain. The police would never be the villain, you know, in these situations. And this continues throughout life. All these police television shows, which perpetuate the mythology of what police do as opposed to the reality. You never see a police show with weekly episodes about the corruption, the brutality that police in America engage in. You know, so, you know, there's no crystal ball for these things. We're just going to have to wait and see. And I think people are holding their breath to see.
But let me ask you this. So win or lose, what is the next chapter in the movement?
Well, if Chauvin is not found guilty, or if there's a hung jury or a mistrial for some reason, something happens between now and the jury verdict, mistrial declared, there will be protests all over the world. The country will explode with protests. And everybody knows it. And I kind of think that's why we saw the blue wall of silence cave in during the Chauvin trial, where you had the police chief and other officers on the witness stand. You never see that, right?
Right.
But
Right.
I just have it in my mind that the mayor of Minneapolis told the chief, take your ass down there and you better testify and you better get a conviction, because if you don't, our city is going, going to face the wrath of people. I don't know if that really happened, but I kind of have that in my mind. It's very difficult for me to think that those people, the police and the other officers, went down there under their own volition to testify against Chauvin. I'm sure there was some discussion between the political leadership and the police leadership. The city of Minneapolis is rocking now. I mean, there hasn't been a verdict yet. Right. Since the trial started, Minneapolis has been rocked with protests. Brooklyn Center, which is only a few miles away from Minneapolis, has been rocked with protests. I mean, can you imagine, that during the course of the trial of Derek Chauvin, you would think that the police were like, well, let's calm down, while our guy is being tried. Let's calm things. Let's try to keep things calm. Right. They still killing people. There have been police brutality incidents in Minneapolis, and I'm not even talking about the protesters. But if we talk about the protesters, the police, probably violated people's human rights, much less civil rights, in Minneapolis, beating protesters, arresting protesters, and the same thing is happening in Brooklyn Center. So, it's going to be, if there's a not guilty verdict, it's going to be an explosive situation. And Max, it has to be.
Did you see what happened in Jersey City over the weekend? The collision.
No, I didn't.
So there was a street protest in which people chanted "F the pigs."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the mayor objected, and there was
And what happened? Hey, Max, you want to hear something? I was at that protest. I was in the car. I got there because I had been at the rally in Hackensack, and I spoke in Hackensack. And then I came to Newark, where POP was doing voter registration on Broad Market. And then I left from there to go to the protest in Jersey City. When I got to Jersey City, they had already started marching. So I caught up to them and I followed them in my car. And I followed them probably 2 or 3 miles, which on foot is a long way, to the public library. And they were at the public library so long, I thought that's where it was going to end. And I went to park my car, and when I came back, they were gone on the march again. So at that point, I left. So you're telling me that something happened after the rally. Tell me again what happened.
Well, I heard someone took a video of protesters saying "F the pigs." And a chant repeated over and over again.
Well, it was the old Black Panther Party chant, "Off the pigs." Off the pigs.
Yes, and the mayor objected and stood up for the police and said this is not a proper protest. And he was met with vociferous opposition.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So,
at the time that I was at the protest, I didn't observe any violence. I didn't observe any vandalism. People, this is what freedom of speech is. It's not freedom for the speech that you like. It's freedom of speech, that, what people say, what they want to say. It reminded me, the rally did remind me of a 1960s style Black Panther rally, and I think the new Black Panther Party might have been one of the organizations. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure who all the sponsors of the thing was. But you
And
know,
what is that? And what is that vibe? Is it a determination? Is it a militant chord?
well, if the average person looking at it would say, yeah, those are some really militant people, you
Right.
know, but what did they do? They had a march, they had a rally. They didn't throw any stones. They didn't break any windows. They didn't vandalize any cars, any buildings. They didn't rough up any civilians, passersby. As a matter of fact, the people who were in shops and stores were coming out and filming the march and rally with their cell phone cameras.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the only thing that I could say that distinguished it from other rallies was the fact that they were saying off the pigs or, you know, F the pigs or whatever. But beyond that, I mean, they were shouting Black Power and off the pig. You know, those were the chants, at least the ones that I heard most of the way. So, you know, the mayor, I can understand. What can I understand? He's walking a tightrope, because what's more offensive? Some people saying F the pigs, or a policeman killing a person with his knee on that person's neck, strangling him in front of a crowd of people urging him to not kill the man and to let an EMT help the man so that he won't die. What's more offensive?
He has a
You know, so
specific, I'm sure he sees that he has a specific responsibility to the police officers of Jersey City. So he has to keep that as a priority, and to his constituents, to the people of Jersey City. And he has to be of mind that he's protecting a police department that is protecting the public.
well, Jersey City has had its fair share of police brutality. And I'm going to tell you, Max, I don't think the majority of Black people in Jersey City see the police the same way Mayor Fulop does. Now, let me say this. I've been at rallies with Mayor Fulop, and he spoke in favor of police reform. And, you know, I gave him personal kudos for that.
Mm-hmm.
He was at press conferences and rallies with Mayor Baraka, calling for certain police reforms, body cameras. I think he may have even at one point supported the idea of a police review board. So for that, you know, for that,
He did actually.
right. So for that, you know, I say that's good. But, you know, in the midst of multiple murders that have become public,
Mm-hmm.
you know, personally, I think he's hurting himself
Mm-hmm.
more. So, because what does he owe the police? What does he owe them? I mean, what is he going to withhold from them? I mean, didn't he negotiate the last contract? Didn't the police get what they want? I mean, is this more of a political thing that he wants to curry favor with the police? Because when you say support the police, what is it? Is he withholding money for protective equipment or for the hiring of more officers so that fewer of them have to work so much overtime? I mean, what is the nature of this support that he has to give them beyond being political support,
Mm-hmm.
saying that, hey, you guys, I'm kind of with you. You know, I'm for this police reform, but I'm kind of with you guys.
Well,
Look, hey, Max, let me say this because I got to speak to this. Do you know what the situation would be if the majority of people in this country, if the majority of Black people in this country actually understood the depth of the problem of police brutality. Do you know how many Black people have been wrongfully arrested by the police, have been brutalized by the police, have been killed by the police, have been framed by the police, have been sent to long prison sentences, 30 and 40 years, by the police for crimes they did not commit? The police should thank God that the only thing some kids are doing are saying F the police.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mr. Lawrence Hamm of the People's Organization for Progress and the leader in the movement in New Jersey against police brutality, I want to thank you for your time tonight, sir, and thank you for all the work that you do. And I've seen you out there on the streets of this state for the last, I don't know, 30 years.
Long time.
You've been here a lot longer, so I want to thank you for what you do, sir.
Thank you, Max, for your great journalism, your real grassroots journalism, and we need more journalists like you, man, because unfortunately, mainstream journalism, in many ways, is not helping the problem. But we are lucky to have journalists like you and others.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right.